Hello and welcome to this episode in our first season of Raising the Roof. Today we're going to talk about the power of brand. And I have to say that I'm really being tested today as I have what I can only class as two heavyweights from the world of comms and media. I can also see from meeting these two individuals the impact that a career in housing has had on me and my appearance, and how good I could have looked had I chosen the same career path as my two guests today, one of whom is a David Beckham lookalike. But before we go to the David Beckham lookalike, there's your clue. First up is one of the smoothest operators in the housing world. In fact, he's so smooth that Choudry wrote a classic tune about him. So, Asif, Choudry, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Nick. That's one hell of an introduction. I hope I can live up to it now.
Oh, I'm sure you will, because let's face it, you know, we've read the corporate bump. You're the sales and marketing director at Resource. And if you don't know who they are, they're an award-winning creative marketing and print provider. Some of those regular listeners to the podcast will know my love of all things paper and print. Asif, though, could run an absolute masterclass on how to successfully build your market profile. I think it's fair to say he's developed the Resource brand within the housing sector and has now become arguably one of the leading providers of comms for what is in effect about the last 15 years. And not only that, but he's now working with in excess of 100 housing associations. Also importantly, he's the founder of Comms Hero. And if you, again, don't know what that is, you've clearly lived on planet Mars, because it's an award-winning conference, but it celebrates really the heroics of the people that work in comms teams. Very often the forgotten few, except of course in Yorkshire Housing, and I've got to say that because our producer today otherwise will cut me off. He set up Comms Hero brand back in 2014, and it has now an online community of over 12,000 followers. But, you know, we also like to dig under the skin of what people want us to know about them versus the things that they try and hide away here on Raising the Roof podcast. Let's, dig the dirt a bit more on him. He's from a family of 12. Now, can you imagine a family of 12 at Christmas? What on earth? I have trouble buying for my 3 kids, let alone what I'd buy for 11 brothers and sisters. And you know, those children range in age from 51 to 35, and he claims to be number 2 in the pecking order. So that might give you a bit of an insight to his age, although he certainly doesn't look that old. And he's a big social media advocate. He's posted 72,000 tweets from his own Twitter account. Clearly has a lot of spare time, but it also hides the true picture because he has a hand in 3 other Twitter accounts as well. So you can probably double that figure at least. Now, I know where he's got his smooth dress sense from, because his favourite series is Suits, which he's watched 3 times. And indeed, on his recommendation, just last night, the Atkin household started watching Suits for the very first time. So if it's rubbish, we're all coming back to haunt you. The one downside and the one factor that nearly stopped him being invited along today is that he's a Liverpool fan. He blames this on growing up in Bradford, where he claims as a result of that, his only choice was Manchester or Liverpool. And I suppose, you know, some of my colleagues will be saying, what about Leeds United? Or even worse, what about Bradford? His final confession is that he's also been known to don a cape and a mask, but he claims that's purely for professional purposes. Anyway, let's move on to my second guest. Basically, David Beckham, who doubles up as Matt Button. He's the co-founder of DS.Emotion. And despite his youthful good looks, he claims to have a career spanning 30 years. And he has a continued burning desire to create outstanding and creative marketing campaigns. And that's across branding, that's across things like property marketing and placemaking. He works and straddles both the public and the private sector. And interestingly, from a housing point of view, has worked on place marketing projects across the country in both the commercial and the resi sector. And he's done things like he's rebranded and repositioned things like Carnaby Street and the Shard and also many sort of large and mixed-use regen projects. So for some of my housing peers, they may well have come across Matt's work. He recently been shortlisted for 5 client projects in Property Week's 2021 awards and 2 winning projects in the 2021 Property Marketing Awards for Best Placemaking Campaign and Best Property Related Website. So that's all the stuff he wants you to know. What doesn't he want you to know? Wow, this is where it gets interesting. Firstly, he's an extreme sports fan, but only when his knees actually permit that. He's in the fortunate position of having gotten rid of all his kids who've flown the nest, and he's now reliving my teens and early 20s because he's a motorbike enthusiast. He's toured much of Europe on a motorbike pre-kids, and as part of his self-confessed midlife crisis, is now looking to get back in the saddle. And it's not just motorbikes. He currently lives on a building site in North Yorkshire, but has a passion for old Land Rovers. So just as well, really, because we all know what building sites are like when you're trying to build a house. It's an absolute mud bath. So doubtlessly has lots of fun in his Land Rover there as well. And the final thing, which we had to dig a little deep for this, but he's also a performer. And it is interesting, really, that our younger listeners won't have heard of Barry Manilow. And indeed, Matt performed this iconic Copacabana song at the Crypt Factory in Leeds. So, Matt, fancy giving it a go?
I'm afraid my microphone is well and truly hung up. Thank you.
Well, that's the end of Barry Manilow. My kids will see my YouTube browsing history and go, what on earth is this? But at least I've got a story behind it. So they're my guests. Let's get cracking. Asif, if I can come to you first, as I mentioned in my intro, you've successfully stormed your way into the housing sector, and you've consolidated that into a really strong foothold. What tips or tricks can you share with any of our listeners who are probably looking to emulate what you've done and break into a new market sector?
I'll be glad to answer that. It's a great question as well. I think there's learning by doing, really. It's been a 12 or 15-year journey, 12 of it on social and in the main Twitter and LinkedIn. And what I'd certainly say to people is the art of engagement is the absolute key. So you can have, there's probably in today's communications and marketing world, the emphasis is on tech, but doesn't matter how good the tech is, it doesn't actually tell you how to engage or how to speak or how to build relationships. They're just literally tools, in the same way that attending networking events and things like that what we did before social media, you had to turn up to these events and converse with people and do the relationship building. That part of it hasn't gone. And I think there's that skill, that soft skills, something that people who go into, just having a social media account and following somebody and posting something to them doesn't mean that you're going to get engagement. There's that whole relationship building process hasn't disappeared. There's just different channels that you've got available to make people more accessible. So I certainly say to people, make sure that, and it doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert. So I don't want people to think, you need to be a salesperson or an extrovert. There's thousands of introverts that I know who are fantastic relationship builders because they've learned the art of communication and applied that in various different channels. So I'd say to people, look at what channels are available. Don't chase all the shiny new ones. Consolidate your positions and make sure you're visible. That the key thing with this is visibility and social media. You had to physically go to events and be in amongst it. And you couldn't have conversations with people before the events and after the events or even during. You had to rely on being in a venue with 200, 300, 400 people and come away with 2 or 3 meaningful conversations. Whereas now you've got the technology that allows you to invest the time, delegate lists are available beforehand, and not just events, but also, not just events that you're attending yourself, but events that you're not attending. I get just as much benefit out of events that I'm not attending as people are talking about it on social, because you can't be everywhere all the time, but you don't need to be physically everywhere all the time. So that's been a big part of that, investing your time. You've got to decide how much time you're going to put into this, dipping in and out for a couple of 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes every day. It doesn't work, to be honest with you. And you've got to know when people are about. And our relationship, myself and yours, Nick, was born over getting advice on a pair of running trainers, God knows how many years ago. And CEOs were, as a target, were not accessible to the likes of salespeople before social media. And I'm talking about Twitter in the main here. I'm not talking about LinkedIn. There's been a huge rise, and that's a 12-year journey that I'm talking about. But it doesn't take 12 years to do it. If you follow the right path. So consistency, you've got to be in amongst it, get involved in conversations, and it's the equivalent of going to a networking event and seeing an established circle of people. How do you walk into the middle of that conversation and be visible? And you've got to try and emulate that in social. And I have to say, as a massive positive about digital social networking and relationship building, it's far easier to do it on social than it is in the physical environment, because that would scare the life out of, it still does to me, but to most people, they just wouldn't do it. So I think you've got to invest the time, be yourself, don't turn into an alter ego of yourself. That's an absolute key thing, because eventually you are going to have to step out from behind that keyboard and meet people face to face, and that you want to be that same reflection of you as you are on digital as you should be when you're in person. And that doesn't always, it sounds like a very simple thing, but it's definitely not always the case. So certainly consider that. Do your research.
Does that mean I need to stop? Does that mean I need to stop using a profile pic from myself from 15 years ago? Is that a no-no?
I have a kind of rule that 2 years really as a max, unless you've had some major changes. I'm going to say dyed your hair, but I'm not talking about you obviously, Nick, there. But
that's only Mark. That can't be me.
No, so it's important to keep that, because you go to events and you do place the Twitter face or the LinkedIn face, and you're looking for somebody, or somebody worse still, somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh, hi Asif, how are you doing?" I'm thinking, okay, right, who are you? And then they tell you who they are, and I'm thinking, no, that's not you, is it? Yeah. Or I thought you would look totally different for the last kind of 10 years. So yeah, definitely keep that profile up to date, and just be yourself, be human, share content that's not work related. And I'm talking about both Twitter and LinkedIn. It's not, LinkedIn's changed a massive amount in the last probably 2 years, I'd say, that you get more complaints on there about people saying, "Oh, this is not Facebook." That in itself is a testament to how LinkedIn's changed the whole platform and how people use it, and that human to human element is a massive part of. It's always been a huge part of relationship building and being visible and getting known, not necessarily just for the professional stuff that you do, because unfortunately, as much as we'd all like to think what we do professionally is the most memorable thing, it's actually probably not. The personal stuff is the things that people remember, and my content split is probably 70% personal and 30% professional. But I do that 30% of professional is me engaging with other people's commentary and thoughts on marketing and communications and sales as well. And that's where I tend to get involved, rather than initially posting specific conversation starters. I tend to do that through the ComZero brand. So, but and it's just become kind of commonplace, because you get to do it for so long that it needs to just become part of your DNA. And also, don't fall into the trap of when you meet people, I tend to remember people's Twitter handles rather than their proper names.
Yeah, so don't have a dodgy one.
And I know when you'd had Paul Taylor on the podcast, I know people used to think he was called Paul Bromford for many years until he cleared that up. So so that's just there's loads of stuff I could go into, but hopefully that's a bit of an insight into.
Yeah, I've got top 5 already there. Got the top 5 there. That's great. Matt, can I ping across to you? Just obviously you work in the housing world, but this podcast also sort of goes much wider than that. So you've worked across a wide range of sectors. What can housing learn from others? Who should housing be looking to be more like with their brand?
Okay, so we do work in a wide variety of sectors across the property and place arena with both public and private sector clients. We learned a lot over the last 18 months, 2 years with regard to how others are communicating and how others have had to switch and change their communications by their audiences. And where we work also outside of the property market, if you like, some of the similes and some of the learnings we could have do relate to the property market. And in particular, I thought it might be worth just mentioning a few of those areas and briefly talk about some of the tactics that they've employed recently and the strategies they've employed to talk to their audiences. Retail and leisure, for instance, when we were told that the country was going to go into lockdown, our immediate and I guess a bit of a knee-jerk reaction was to worry quite a lot about the retail and leisure sector. We represent quite a lot of places around the country that focus on both shopping centres, high streets, etc. And initially we stopped and had to think a lot about how our clients needed to communicate to their occupiers as much as to their audiences, their consumer audiences, which we did. And we very quickly realized actually that regularity of communication, utilizing digital and social channels, such as Asif has been talking about, was going to be absolutely key for them. And so as an agency that have developed a social media department, and obviously we've got quite a strong digital department that was combined traditionally with other ways to reach out through activations or through events, etc., to engage their customers, we suddenly switched to online and therefore had to make sure that people could understand the communications we were putting out. And that was around consistency. And this will be a theme that I'll come back to probably later in this conversation. But this was around consistency, regularity, and motivation. And that was trying to keep people, our consumers, from a retail and leisure perspective, on the hook and believing that that these places would still exist in some shape or form from a social perspective. So our emphasis changed very much from one-to-one engagement or group events or activations and PR exercises, etc., very much towards that social engagement, and the regularity went up enormously for the retail and leisure sector. Another area that was affected quite heavily and is still being affected in many ways is the office market. So we represent office buildings through to large office parks, etc. And the key here was a switch towards agility. We had to think very, very quickly about how we could help our landlords and business park owners, etc., communicate with their corporate audiences and the staff who worked in these environments. And we created tools to enable them to be able to plan who could come into the office when, just simple scheduling tools so that people could dial in and see who was in, who wasn't in, who had COVID, who didn't have COVID, etc., which we felt was a useful tool for the office market. But I think now, as we start to emerge from this situation, the need for agility is still there. I think that the office market is going to have to respond very cleverly to potentially a changing market where brand experience, environment, activities and engagement and social engagement is going to be really, really important for workers who perhaps don't have that at the end of a phone line or at the end of a Teams line, they might well have been using for the last 2 years. And our emphasis is in trying to drive those people back to the office market, getting them back into the workplace safely, and doing so in a manner that will be ultimately rewarding for those younger and older audiences who work in that sector. Riding over all of this is the placemaking work that we do, perhaps an overused and sometimes understood term. But effectively, this market and how this engages with people generally, really, this is about people. It's not about buildings or spaces or houses. It's about people. And recognizing that communities and people need to come together is absolutely key here. The housing sector, I think, whether that's social or private sale, whatever it might be, needs to recognize that this is all about people and this is all about community. Yeah. And how do we reach out to those communities? How do we bring those people together? Sometimes who now don't want to be brought together because of safety reasons or health reasons or whatever it might be. But overriding the top of this is a health and well-being factor. And I think that bringing people together within either digital or physical social environments is absolutely key to create happy, content, and long-term sustainable communities. And that it doesn't discriminate between residential or parkland space or office development. So that's one thing that we would place an emphasis on now with our clients, is to say that people really are the one deciding factor. And when it comes to business audiences or consumer audiences, as Asif said earlier on, social media is an amazing tool to utilize to be able to bring people together, but it doesn't discriminate between people who are either from a business audience or a consumer audience. The line between B2B and consumer communications is very, very thin now. So we need to make sure that we choose our words wisely and choose our motivations wisely in order to be able to bring those people together. As far as who the housing sector should look like, well, I think having worked across broad housing sectors, I've been inspired by the work that Yorkshire Housing has entered into doing, and your approach to how you wanted to build a brand, an evolving brand for yourselves. And I think that the housing sector should look to people who are literally delivering that change and those sort of new ways of doing things, and looking to be innovative with the way that they position their brands, etc. And you did a really good job, I believe, and it's articulated on your current website, even never mind your new website.
No pressure there, Matt.
No pressure there. To identifying your strengths in your brand and identifying your promises and your values and what behaviours those values might bring to the people who work with or encounter your brand firsthand. So therefore, I think that it doesn't really matter what sector. I think having and I'm talking as a branding person here, having a unique proposition, sometimes in an ununique market, is difficult to achieve. But I think if you can achieve it, if you can articulate it, and then if you can communicate it effectively, I think that's a real asset for businesses moving forwards.
Okay, we'll come back to that if we get some time, actually, Matt, because I think I want to unpack that a little bit more. But I think the point you said around consistency and regularity of the message and choosing your words wisely, for me as a leader of a business, that's probably the biggest single thing that's come out of the pandemic in terms of getting the message through to colleagues, yes, but also to customers. And I think it has been a game changer. I think we are genuinely, and I've said it before, I think we're living through a revolution at the moment, and that revolution still hasn't finished in terms of how we live our lives, how we communicate, how we work, when we work, all those sorts of things. And you touched on it there as well in terms of the reference to the challenges that officers have, people who rent and sell office space. I think that's still to unwind a little bit further. I'm going to flip back to Asif, just because you've set up with a previous guest on Raising the Roof, Amy Nettleton, who, if you haven't heard that episode, it was episode 4, part 2, on shared ownership. Definitely worth a listen. But you set up with Amy the second best housing podcast, So Chat Hour. So again, building on some of the stuff that Matt was saying and what you said before, what was your thinking behind that, and what do you think has been its biggest success in branding terms?
I think the keeping the message simple with that, because I think the shared ownership, it's having kind of been involved in that space for 5-6 years now, but having been involved in housing for probably 10 years prior to that, it was a huge shift in my kind of approach to how housing organizations marketed themselves. So having done the previous 10 years with social housing, and everything was, you wouldn't necessarily consider using fancy print finishes on marketing collateral. And all of a sudden, working with Astor Group and working in shared ownership and competing against private sector developers, and Matt will know all about this, is that for me, it's like, hang on, we're getting specifications where people want us to put laminates and spot UVs on, and on the brochures and on the marketing collateral. And that was a huge change. So as I spent more time in that space, I realized that even within the same organizations, there was an almost intrinsically linked set of values, but to an entirely different set of customers, which required different language, different tone of voice. One is selling and one's providing homes for social rent. Two, how do they work hand in hand? These questions that, should organizations have separate brands to do the shared ownership selling, because it is selling, and the social rent? So there were all these questions that came up, and the only time these questions were being asked was at the NatFed's Affordable Home Ownership Conference, or the NSG National Sales Group conferences that were specifically dedicated to shared ownership. But within the sector itself, you had this kind of social housing, or people who were working in that side now having to try and sell homes, because 5-6 years ago, I don't think, the actual sales and marketing functions of those organizations were as well resourced and had the relevant budgets applied to them as they do today. So that has definitely changed.
I can definitely vouch for that. Yeah.
Without a shadow of a doubt. There's been a huge change. And so what we wanted to do, Amy and I, kind of, as we were talking, we said, well, look, we've met so many people across the sector, and there's nobody really asking the conversations that are, or having the conversations outside of a national conference environment. Because the national conference environment, as good as it is, and it's great for getting people together once a year, the work doesn't get done in that one day. It's the other 364 days that make the difference. And we said, well, how can we do this? And we said, well, let's create a conversation. And we said, well, let's try and kick something off in Twitter Hours. And we launched it 4 years ago now, back in 2017 in November. And in the first year, that commitment I talked about at the beginning, the consistency, we did 48 Twitter Hours between 8 and 9 p.m. Solidly, week after week, finding guests, giving it a brand, treating it like a proper marketing campaign. So rather than just calling, what should it be called? What should the branding look like? How do we get people involved in it? And creating a community, as Matt mentioned as well, it's absolutely crucial. That how do we create a community of people that can talk confidently about shared ownership and get advice on legal, sales, marketing, financials, and whatever, development, all the things that impact shared ownership.
It goes back to that regularity point, doesn't it, that Matt spoke about before as well, in terms of week after week, same similar message in terms of how you get there with it and what its purpose is. Well, one thing do you think it's changed? If you were to say what's been the single biggest success?
I'd say the imparting information and getting people to think differently about shared ownership and take the social housing hat off and put your shared ownership hat on. I think it's just educated people, and I think, and informed, definitely.
Great stuff. Thank you. Matt, I'm going to come back to you because I want to talk about reputation. But before I do that, if you could just summarise what you think the wider world, how they view the housing sector, and what one thing you'd do if you were, say, me, a HA chief exec, what one change would you make to improve the brand?
I said this before, and I'm not trying to flatter you, but I think that you've taken some of those steps already, which is a fantastically encouraging thing.
We can always do more. As my colleagues know, I'm never happy. We can always do more. We can raise the bar.
Oh. Absolutely, it's true. It is true. We can all always do more, and we can always change and respond to the reactions that we get for doing some of the things that we've done as well, can't we? But I think that at the moment, what would I do as a chief exec? I think while people are still working, and I know that Yorkshire Housing are working more agilely and remotely than ever before. I think that means that as a chief executive, you're probably slightly, in some ways, more detached from your workforce, from the people that work with you, and in other ways, and the possibilities are that you could be closer to them as well. There are only so many hours in the day, of course, to be able to reach out and metaphorically, of course, wrap your arms around people and say, we're all in this together and we're all a team together, and let me listen to what you want to talk about. But I think that listening and responding and talking to people as a chief executive is a fantastically powerful thing that you can do. And I think that as you become more senior through a business, or as a business grows or evolves, you realize that your role is probably it's a people role as opposed to doing role. I'm not a digital, I can't build websites. I'm not a social media expert. I'm not a copywriter. But
now you tell me we've appointed you. You shouldn't be telling me that.
But I do have some brand consultancy skills. A lot of it
beautifully recovered. I could see Asif making a move then. He was saying we could do that.
I do know that I have experts within the organisation who
beautiful. That's why you're in brand and comms. You see those sort of responses.
But my job, therefore, is to work with those people to get the very best out of them. And I think that sometimes comes from a greater HR role than I've ever had before as a chief exec, or as a co-founder of a business. And so that would be my answer. I think you're moving in the right direction. I think listening and responding is doing well. I think building a set of values that you can build genuine, simple, understandable behaviours on the back of is key.
Great stuff. Right. I'm going to really speed things up now because we are about to go into the quick fire round. But before we do, I just want to touch on one really topical issue, which is the reputation of the housing sector has been dented over the last few months by some of the recent media coverage on what you can only describe as shocking examples of where basic repairs haven't been carried out. What one thing do you think the housing sector should do to take back control of some of the narrative around that and repair some of the damage?
I think that we need to communicate better. I think we need to face up to the issues that have arisen sometimes. And these are not issues that are exclusive to the housing sector. Quality, speed of repair, whatever it might be, it is damaging. But it's more damaging if you turn away and don't face those issues. I think communicating honestly with your audiences, confronting those issues, and trying to build reassurance that you are working as hard as you can, given sometimes difficult circumstances with regard to labour forces or COVID or remote working. To get out there and actually meet people, be in people's homes to rectify matters is not an easy thing. And I think I think the consumer, the resident understands that. Yeah. And I think if you can communicate clearly that you are trying to do these things during difficult times, and that you are making every effort by communicating regularly with them to take them on that journey to touch those points, then I think that will hopefully be helpful.
Great stuff. Asif, what would you do?
Don't wait for because in 15 years working with housing, don't wait for these dispatches or panorama programs. You can be talking about, there's masses of positive stuff happening in housing. Don't wait for Housing Day. Don't wait for the negative media before you start putting the positive messages out. You need to be doing that every day because there's stuff happening every single day of the week. And use your community liaison officers, housing officers, regen officers, as well as your comms teams to get those authentic messages out. The content within the housing sector is immense, but the actual communication, as Matt mentioned, the communication of that content, I've always said, when those dispatches, panorama programs are being aired, there's absolutely nobody from housing commenting on social about it. There's always the negative stuff.
Yeah.
So, the NatFed, CIH, people like that, they've got a responsibility, and so have all the HAs. Get involved in the conversation and push, not schedule, but get some authentic conversations out. So it's a simple, not necessarily a total solution, but it's the start of the solution.
Great stuff. Some great advice there. And even better for listeners of the podcast, it's free of charge. So we're going to go a quick fire round, which is where you find out a little bit more about our guests. Best brand you've ever come across or that you admire the most? Asif, go with you first.
Innocent for me. I've never watched Bake Off or the Eurovision, but I do through the tweets of Innocent.
Brilliant. Right. Okay. Matt?
Recently seen House of Gucci, which was perhaps one of the most volatile organizations you can ever possibly imagine, yet managed to ride through and create something amazing out of it. So Gucci is quite inspiring. I think from a place perspective, Savile Row has evolved and changed over the years as a place and a destination known globally. It's one street in London, but it has an enormous reputation and it's managed to evolve.
Great stuff. Lovely plug as well, Matt. I like your style. So Matt, we'll stay with you. Apple or Android? And this could be the end of a relationship, a beautiful relationship if you get this wrong.
I'm sorry, but I'm Apple. I'm trapped in an orchard with no way out.
So you're Apple. Absolutely fantastic. No pressure, Asif, but you know where this is going.
Apple as well for me.
Excellent. Even the producer's nodding on that one. Okay, so you both look like early adopters. So on electric cars, Tesla or Polestar? Asif, to you first.
It'd be Tesla, but there's not much. I don't like either of them, if I'm honest with you. I like what they're about. But as cars, I've got a hybrid X5 myself. So I am in that space, but it'd be Tesla.
Okay, you might have just recovered your position there. Matt?
Again, I would say neither probably, although they are groundbreaking and, there's great brands out there, there's no doubt. I'm actually, I'm a fifth year electric car driver now, and I actually choose Audi.
Oh, wow. Okay. Right. There you go. There's a topical one. Right. So really quick, one gadget you'd take with you on a desert island? Matt?
My Leatherman multi-tool. Cracking coconuts, great tool, cutting things, gutting fish, sort of.
Right, so talking of desert islands, you've got that with you. Favourite holiday destination? One word?
Tuscany.
Oh,
Mallorca.
Not much use for your multi-tool there, is there really? Asif, one gadget you take with you on a desert island?
That's going to be my phone.
Your phone. And favourite holiday dest?
Dubai.
Oh, right, okay. So final one from me is most interesting person you've ever met? Asif?
That's my late father, without a shadow of a doubt.
Oh, great answer. Matt?
I don't have an answer quite as good as that one, but I once met Ranulph Fiennes, who was quite inspiring. Wow. Chopped his own fingers off in a shed because of frostbite. So, I mean, that's dedication to the cause and some true grit there, isn't there?
Absolutely. As ever, on this podcast, time is against us. So firstly, a massive thanks to Asif and Matt. You've been exceptional. Everything I knew you'd be approaching this recording and much more besides. Thanks to all of you out there who are listening. Our next episode is the final episode in season 1, is on sustainable living. So watch for that being launched on a podcast site near you soon. You can also find all our other episodes wherever you usually get your podcasts. But for now, it's time to close the front door on this episode of Raising the Roof. Until next time, thanks for listening.